First bill we have on the agenda today is House File 3587. Get the right number here. I will move that House File 3587 be laid over for possible inclusion. Representative Bonner, welcome to the committee. Proceed with your, explain your bill. And just make sure there is no amendments. Nope.
No amendments for today. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members. It is a pleasure to be before the Labor and Industry Committee today. I am here today to talk about House File 3587. Members, today the conundrum of persistent pay gaps continues, and unfortunately little progress has been made to move the needle in recent decades. For women and people of color, despite all other factors being similar, this presents a serious challenge. Estimates suggest that without intervention, it will take approximately 132 years, that's the conservative estimate, to close that gap. There's been much study on how to solve the problem, but two solutions rise to the top. The first is prohibiting previous salary information, which we passed last year. And the second is pay transparency, specifically pay ranges and disclosure of benefits. This is precisely the focus of this bill. Numerous states have already passed legislation, and the data suggests it's working and compliance is high. The real test is the benefits to employers and employees alike. For employees, benefits can be a game changer, resulting in increased transparency, which leads to more informed choices, including better negotiating power and higher levels of trust with potential employers. Positions with pay transparency report higher rates of job satisfaction, and workers are 30% less likely to leave. Studies also show employees work harder when they know the value of their contributions. On the employer side of the equation, the benefits paid literal dividends, saving time, money, and resources. For employers, publishing pay ranges led to greater trust in the hiring organization, greater retention when employees could see the path to advancement, greater pay, and the value of their contribution. Better still, studies have indicated pay transparency led to greater productivity overall. But the real bottom line is that pay transparency produces 70% more applicants, 66% more qualified candidates, creating greater efficiencies while reducing the time spent on recruiting and hiring. More importantly, it drove down costs. In a fierce labor market with conditions ripe for worker shortages and more competition, pay transparency allows businesses to be more competitive and attract top talent. These realities are the factors behind a hiring lab report stating that the number of job postings with pay transparency has tripled since 2020. The reality is that the world is changing, and the worker expectations are driving change as well. 98% of job seekers believe pay ranges should be posted. 82% of U.S. workers are more likely to apply with pay transparency. 74% are less likely to apply without it. But here's the question: does it work? The answer is a resounding yes. In 2019, Colorado reported high compliance within the first months of passage, and salaries went up by an average of 3.6%. In the public sector, where pay structures are public, they have a much tighter wage gap and a more equitable pay distribution. For example, federal government, where pay rates are publicly available, can prove this concept out. With women earning 94 cents on the dollar compared to just 80 cents on the dollar elsewhere. And the numbers go down from there: 71 cents for moms compared to dads, 69 cents for African American women, 59 cents for Native women, and 57 for Latinas. Why it matters. According to the 2018 report on the status of women and girls in Minnesota, women are more likely than ever to be the primary breadwinner, with 74% of African American households and 77% Indigenous, and roughly 50% or more of white, Asian, and Latina mothers filling this role. Women incur more educational debt, are less likely to own a home, more likely to earn less, sometimes substantially less, and live in poverty, making women and children more likely to need public services. Minnesota ranks second worst in the nation for racial equity and has poverty rates higher than the national average, putting women and children at risk. So some final thoughts on the economic impact of women and minorities in the workplace. Pay gaps for women result in a loss of approximately $900,000 over a lifetime, and that's without the value of compound interest lost. If equal pay was a reality in the U.S., the poverty rate for women would be cut in half, adding $541 billion into the U.S. economy, amounting to 2.8% of the GDP. The World Bank predicts the global impact would be about $7 trillion and will raise global economic activity by 7%. At home here in Minnesota, the impact to the reality faced by pay gaps is real. The impact on state budgets and state programs is real, and it's too expensive to ignore. For women and communities of color, pay transparency can close these very real gaps, and the data proves this out. I ask for your support of House File 3587. And with that, I have my testifier here.
Thank you. Representative Bonner, I've got two people on my list here. You're not Brian, so I'm assuming you're Jill Assadeh. If you want to state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Chair Nelson and members of the Labor and Industry Committee, thank you for inviting me. I'm Jill Hasday. I'm a distinguished McKnight University professor and the Centennial Professor of Law at the University of Minnesota Law School. I teach and write about sex discrimination and constitutional law, among other subjects. In my time today, I would like to make one simple but fundamental point. Pay transparency promotes pay equity. I'll start with some historical background before describing the current state of the law and the need for legislative action. Before 1963, it was perfectly legal for employers to pay women less than men. This type of discrimination was pervasive and out in the open. For example, help wanted ads would list one salary for male workers and a lower salary for women performing the same work. Many Americans hoped that the Federal Equal Pay Act of 1963 would end pay discrimination between men and women, but more than 6 decades later, an enormous wage gap persists. The median annual earnings for women working full-time and year-round in 2022 were just 84% of the median annual earnings for full-time year-round male workers, with Black women earning just 69% of white men's earnings and Latinas earning just 57%. A recent report estimates, based on past trends, that America's pay gap will not close for Asian women until 2046, for white women until 2066, for Black women until 2044, and for Latinas until 2210. Minnesota statistics are even worse. Over the past 5 years, women who work full-time and year-round in our state have earned an average of 79 cents for every dollar a full-time year-round male worker earns. 31 states have smaller gender pay gaps than we do. One important reason for these persistent wage gaps is that employers often keep their pay decisions secret. That pay secrecy makes it easier for employers to get away with paying different salaries for the same work. How is a job applicant supposed to know that the employer is offering her a lower salary than someone else if the employer can keep the wage or wage range for that position secret? Federal law does not require employers to disclose a job's wage or wage range. I'll repeat that because it's important. Federal law does not stop employers from concealing a wage or wage range. Keeping wages secret facilitates pay discrimination, but efforts to amend federal law to require employers to disclose wages or wage ranges have been unsuccessful. A growing number of states have responded to this problem by enacting their own legislation. An October 2023 survey found that 11 states had wage range transparency laws in place. These laws are aimed at promoting pay equity. Researchers found that a similar Canadian law requiring the disclosure of university faculty salaries succeeded in shrinking the gender pay gap in those salaries. Minnesota should join that reform movement. Every Minnesotan deserves equal pay for equal work. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your testimony. Representative Bonner, is Brian Smith here, or?
Yes,
Come on
Mr.
up.
Chair.
Welcome to the committee. State your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Hello, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Brian Smith. I'm a resident of St. Paul. All the views I express here are purely my own, don't represent my employer or any other organization. Members of the committee, I want you to imagine going into a grocery store, and in that grocery store, some items are listed price per pound, some items are listed the price for the item, but a large substantial portion of the other items have no price at all. When taking that item to the cashier, they would say, oh, we'll tell you the price, but only after weeks of interviews, after we ask what your price expectation is for that, and then only then we'll tell you the price. As absurd as a scenario that may seem, it is the case that is the case now for job applicants in Minnesota. We can change that with this bill by requiring that employers list the pay range as they should for basic fairness. Not only would it combat the gender and racial wage gap, but it would actually make things easier for both applicants and recruiters, both benefiting employees and employers. It would make jobs easier for applicants to find positions that would actually meet their salary expectations. A recent survey from the Society of Human Resource Management employer-based group found that 54% of employees have said that they've rejected a job offer outright after learning the salary. It also provides opportunities and motivation to grow from within, both encouraging employees to stay within their existing organization and for employers to retain those employees. As the former CEO of Whole Foods said, it gives employees something to strive for. And you may be asking, is this an undue burden onto employers? And research has actually shown that it's not, and actually is a benefit. And there's been examples in Minnesota where some of the most vulnerable employers have been successful in implementing pay transparent policies. In 2020, the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, as well as the Springboard for the Arts and Pollen, all instituted pay transparent policies and have been successful for the past 3 years. They've also submitted written testimony to say the same. So even some of the smallest, most vulnerable employees are able to be fully compliant with pay transparency policies. And this bill would also limit it to employers with at least employees, so some of the smallest businesses would be excluded. It would also, again, avoid wasted recruitment time and failed searches for recruiters, which as research from the Society of Human Resource Management, again, an employer advocacy organization has shown would benefit employees. And that same research that Representative Bonner mentioned, that 70% of employers said that it has led to more applicants, and 65% has made them more competitive in the marketplace. And again, it also has been shown to improve employee retention and productivity with research. So with that, I urge support of this bill.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, is there anybody else first in the audience that needs to speak for or against this? Before I go to member questions, members, questions. Representative Mecklin, raise your eyebrows. I think that. Is that what we have to do? Oh, I didn't see a hand go up, but I
think we have a microphone malfunction. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last year, we heard several bills that had different levels of employees. How did we arrive at 30 on this one?
Representative Bonner.
You know, there's a couple of, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Mecklin. There's a couple of policies out there, and I think we went back and forth. I will say, actually, a number of states, there is one state that has a little bit higher threshold than us, but most of those that have already put it in place actually have much lower thresholds. Some have no threshold, and some of them have 15 as their threshold. This was just what we felt in talking with some stakeholders seemed like a reasonable place to start. But certainly, I know there are differing opinions, but I should be clear that most states actually start at about 15 as their threshold.
Representative Mecklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's more, I mean, there wasn't anything specific. It was just kind of an arbitrary thing you guys came up with.
Representative Bonner.
You know, and we thought about, I think when Dr. Mann and I were talking through this, we know that small employers have a lot on their plates. And so there was a consideration about what would that mean, particularly for smaller employers. Well, I will say that I don't think this is hard to implement. And in fact, a lot of companies, particularly smaller employers, already do it. We did want to be thoughtful about how we address that, particularly with those small employers in light of some of the recent changes they've been experiencing.
Representative Mecklin, are you done? Or
No, one more. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. I'm sure the small business community does as well. So if you're an employer that employs both in Minnesota and Wisconsin, how does this work in that thing if you have employees coming from both states, but they're working here, or maybe they have some that are over there, depending? I mean, how do you... It's kind of a question. I mean, we're going to say the same thing in the Dakotas as well, but in Iowa, of course.
Representative Bonner.
Mr. Chair and Representative. So this is actually employer-based, so that would be employers within the bounds of Minnesota. Certainly, they could have employees that come from Wisconsin as well. I know that there are actually a number of other states who are looking at this legislation, and I think actually Wisconsin is one of them, to be candid with you. But that said, if there are employees who are coming from Wisconsin, they would have the benefit of that transparency as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Bonner, I read that according to the National Women's Center, Law Center, the salary is not posted, women lose out. I'd like to see that data. I question that, because first of all, women are a heck of a lot smarter than men, in my 50-some years of observation, and being married for 25 years, almost 26 now. And they're much wiser and more astute, and I just can't believe that they would lose out because the salary is not posted. They're a lot smarter than that. We'd be in a lot of trouble if, if we didn't know any better. So I'd like to see that data, or just maybe get your comments on that. And then in the other states that have done this in the nation, I see there's several of them. Is there any analytical data that did improve the wages for women and those in minorities?
Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. First, there's loads and loads of data, actually. I did not want to bore you with all of that. The one article that I did actually include in your packet, if you look through that in the back, there are almost a whole page of references there that include piles and piles of data on that last page. It doesn't expressly list out that data from all of those specific sources, but it makes reference to them. So there's literally a whole page of potential resources to choose from. There are also a number of resources, such as the Economic Status of Women report, and I might be slightly getting the name of that wrong. There's piles and piles of data. But I will say this to you. I appreciate that you think that women are much smarter. I appreciate that. What I will say with that is that, we have grown up in an era in which there is a real secrecy around discussing pay matters and what that looks like. And I will just give you my example. I worked in a technology firm, a very well-known one here. I moved over into a new department and took on a job where I was basically filling the same role as many of my colleagues. And I later, when I was getting ready to leave that job, it became apparent to me that a colleague reached out to me and he said, I just want you to know that I've been quietly asking all the employees in our department who fill the same role about what their earnings are, because he was considering asking for a raise. And he said, I was astounded to find out that while our department is 90%, almost 95% women, that all of the women in the department were making less than he was. And all of those women were making substantially less than he was. And I want to just put this in reference. The women in that department, many of them who had been with the company for significant amounts of time, had significant amounts of experience, far more than the colleague asking for the raise. And in my case, I actually was filling a double role, not just one role, but two, at the behest of my employer, and managing twice as many employees and twice as many teams. So what I found out that actually averaged out to was a loss of about $20,000 a year in that same role with more responsibility. Over the course of 5 years, that was $100,000. So when I said earlier that the average is about $900,000 over the lifetime of an individual, I can tell you that I lost out on $100,000 in just 5 years. And if you were to think about women living longer and putting money into, say, a 401k account, for example, think about the value of compound interest. That $900K now multiplies significantly. And I'm sorry, I was actually going to do the math on that for you, but I didn't do that ahead of this. But I'm sure there's some pretty astute folks who could figure out what the average rate of interest might be on investments, for example. But that said, I think my story, and this is the part I want to underscore for folks in this committee, my story is one example. But it is not uncommon to find that these stories are widespread, that they are commonplace. This is not an issue of just one person here or one person there or one employer here or one employer there. I think the numbers and the statistics bear out that this is really a significant challenge. You know, when we're talking about a global economic impact of $7 trillion in lost wages, that's pretty significant. $458 billion just in the US alone. And think about those women and losing that pay and what that means as state legislators. That means more folks on our public programs, more women and children in poverty. That means we as a state are also having to budget for resources to assist with that as well, simply because we have not paid them fairly. And I think we could all agree that our state budgets could certainly use some lightening, or there are some other ways in which we could probably better be spending our money than having to supplement when women are not, or minorities are not being paid fairly.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'll just say this, Representative Bonner, your employer's loss is your constituents' gain.
Thank you.
And that's all I have to say about the
All right.
Further questions? Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Bonner. This is an interesting concept to be brought before us today, and I wanted to ask the question of how you arrive at the salary range if it can vary greatly among someone's qualifications, life experience, work experience, and how you reckon with that within what might be a salary range.
Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Schultz. I will say, first of all, many of you may know and are well aware that I am a technology person, and that means data. We have tons and tons of data. Every HR department out there, first of all, has access to data within their own company to know what those salary ranges are for similar positions. Secondly, literally in this day and age, you can go out to glassdoor.com, you can go to Monster, there's a number of different employment sites, and you can literally Google average salary ranges for someone in a specific position or specific area. That gives you a pretty solid idea of where you might be. And to be candid, if employers are not doing that, they probably should be in order to be competitive in the workplace, candidly, to compete for good quality employees. So the data is really readily available to do that. And most employers who've employed this now have found that they had no barrier to doing so.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may have mentioned it, and I may have just not heard it, but number one, how many other states have something like this? And then in those instances of those other states, have we seen any negative impacts? Are there examples that you have seen in your research to suggest that this may drive down posted salary ranges for organizations seeking to hire?
Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I will say that I did find one obscure study that I don't know how comprehensive it was that suggested that there was a possibility that some employers could do that, but I don't know that it was very well backed up with actual data behind it and what that meant on a larger scale. I'd also like to see them repeat that. And to the contrary, what I found in doing research is a plethora of studies and information that actually said quite the opposite. And in fact, what they typically said was that having those salary ranges available most definitely attracted more applicants. It attracted more quality applicants, and that they found that it provided a really useful tool for employees going in and having that conversation with the employer. And certainly employers and employees have to do that negotiation, but understanding what those ranges are up front definitely added to the process. And I think what we saw is that employees who were hired under such a policy actually tended to have more productivity. They tended to be 30% less likely to leave that position and more likely to advance within the company. We also saw good research that suggests that those individuals were also more likely to be promoted within the company and into management structures.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Bonner, for indulging me on this a little bit. How many states have this, and are there any negative impacts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Bonner.
Ms. Representative Schultz. I have not seen any data for suggesting there aren't any negative impacts from other states. There are currently, I believe, about 17 that have this implemented already. And there are probably at least a dozen or to 15 or so right now that are currently considering this legislation, including Minnesota.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in kind of wrapping up my comments here, I think Minnesotans are really thriving. There's a lot of great job opportunities out there, and look forward to more to legislation that's going to help Minnesotans make even more money. Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing the bill up, Representative Bonner. I was doing some quick Googling while we were sitting here, and I brought up the title of it is the Equal Pay for Equal Work Law, Minnesota's law that prohibits employers from paying women employees at a rate less than the male employees receive for equal work. Isn't this already a Minnesota law? I'm confused.
Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Daniels. Most states actually do have equal pay laws on the books and have been in implementation for decades. In fact, many of them date back all the way to the 60s. What we have found is that, unfortunately, because there isn't very much transparency in the process, we have found that those gaps have moved very little over time. But in structures where pay transparency is readily apparent, we have seen significant narrowing of those wage gaps. And I think a lot of it does boil down to the secrecy of that. Candidly, I will say that I think, again, it seems there's two things going on here. I will say, first, the world is moving in a way in which job applicants are demanding more transparency. And I think it's also a matter of saying, you know, there aren't very good reasons for us not to be transparent. Let's be honest about that. And what we see is that the benefits of moving to a more transparent model are significantly moving the needle in making sure that those laws that are on the books are actually living up to their promise. And I would expect that that would happen here too. And as you know, we are legislators. We are responsible for taking in revenue and distributing services. And so understanding the amount of economic power that can be powered by that engine of more money in our economy is a pretty powerful motivator for us as legislators to say, you know what, not only is it the right thing to do, but it makes sense. It makes sense for employees and for employers to make sure that we are following the law and that we're improving that transparency and making sure that we're being equitable.
Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that answer. I guess I'm still a little wondering why we are going to have another bill putting more mandates on the salary ranges, which is, I'm not against that per se, but when there's a law already on the books of equal pay for equal work. I also come from the old school where if you're going to hire somebody and you get to interview them, they may have some things you're really looking for, and that might start them at a higher wage, him or her, start at a higher wage. I've been involved in a lot of training at Northern Tool and Equipment Manufacturing, where I have to train people in, and their job was to be a technician for small engines and steam cleaners, those type of things. So a lot of technical stuff. So if I'm taking somebody off the sidewalk and trying to train him in to do it he needs to do on the phone, which is nearly impossible, he or she are going to start a much lower pay scale because we have to be training them in for up to about 2 years. So I'm just wondering, what's this going to do to the merit system? Is there enough range between high and low so you can start a person out that's got to learn everything compared to somebody that can just step into the role? And in fact, I had that. Our last hire when I was there was a person that raced cars, raced go-karts with his son, built auto trailers, just when, did his own mechanic work on everything. I didn't have to train him at all. He just stepped in, and the second day he was at the job, he was taking phone calls and troubleshooting over the phone. But when I try to take somebody off the sidewalk and who's never started a lawnmower before, it's, you see what I'm saying? There's a wide range, and I don't know if this bill will get to that.
Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Daniels. And actually, thank you for that question. I appreciate that. I will say the bill very specifically on line 1.16 specifically says a salary range means the minimum and the maximum annual salary or hourly range of compensation for a job opportunity. And I think there is, and then just down below that between 1.19 and 1.21, it outlines the starting salary and a general description of the benefits and other compensation offered to the job applicant. So certainly, yes, there will most definitely, this allows for you to put both a minimum and a maximum, so folks will know what they're up against. And I think it's certainly reasonable to expect that, to your point, that if someone were coming in fresh off the street, that they are well aware of what that minimum is and that may be where they start. And certainly that's a negotiation between you and them. But I think one of the bonuses for employers is that you have someone walking in from off the street who already knows what that minimum is. And that certainly still allows for the negotiation between the employer and the employee to have that conversation. And this bill in no way negates the ability to have that conversation. And certainly, I appreciate, by the way, your example. My father was a fourth generation railroad man, carman on the railroad, and then turned into a mechanical engineer for Bloomington Schools for 30-plus years. So I definitely appreciate the idea of, starting at the bottom and working your way up and learning those skills and those trades and how valuable that is as your experience grows and the abilities that you have continue to grow with it. So I think having that minimum and the maximum definitely gives transparency, but it also helps set expectations for folks who are well aware coming in the door.
Representative Daniel.
Just a closing comment on that. That your range is going to be minimum wage to, when I was in charge of we had about 11 people that did the troubleshooting in the tech department. I mean, the wide range would be minimum wage when they started, and then if I had somebody like this person who was racing cars and go-karts with his son and building trailers, and he knew all the electrical, hydraulic and stuff, I mean, it might be a $30 an hour difference because he can hit the ground running. So just my only comment is that whatever that range is, it's going to have to be pretty huge to fill in the beginner versus the person who can walk right into the job. So that's my only comment.
Representative McDonald, you had another question?
Yeah, quick question, Mr. Chair, then we can move on. Just on the language of your bill, Representative Bonner, on lines 1.16 to 1.18, is that contradictory to 2.1 and 2.3?
Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. No, I think what it actually is saying is that there is some level of flexibility here. Now, we would expect, and this has been the case in most states where this has actually been implemented, that most people actually list a range, right? And generally, they list a range for all of the reasons Representative Daniels may have suggested. One thing, though, that would be slightly different, and I think that you look at, in many positions, you might have sort of certain levels of a position, right? You might have an analyst 1, an analyst 2, an analyst 3, and each of those moves up with the level of experience, right? So if you're listing your job description, you're going to talk about how much experience you have, and you might list the range for people starting at, say, level 1, or the difference or the ranges for level 2 or level 3. So I think, that does help negate some of the concern around, wide salary ranges. And generally speaking, most states have actually put in, and I know that we did not do so for this particular hearing, but it is very likely that we will add a piece of language that is common in most states that says that it should be a good faith estimate of what that range is. And that's just saying that for employers, we ask you to do your best. I will say that anecdotally, some of the research that I dug into, the more specific those ranges were, the more helpful they were, and it tended to attract more applicants by having more specific ranges, and they tended to get better quality candidates by doing so. So certainly someone could put larger ranges, but, I would suggest thoughtfully that most employers would probably want to put it a little bit more narrow and more specific to that particular job classification or experience to help job seekers coming in the door, so that everyone does not waste any time on either side of that equation, because I know it can be very expensive to try and recruit talent and put them through their paces to make sure that it's a good fit for both parties. So we certainly want to account for that and make sure that that cost stays down for the employers, and the opportunity cost is there, doesn't get lost for employees.
Representative McDonald?
Yeah, lastly, and I think that overall the bill it has some good merits, and certainly I don't see much harm in it. I think that probably will do more good than bad. But question for nonpartisan staff, just on that line 2.2, where it says a salary range may not be open-ended. Now, this bill wouldn't affect me because I don't have 30 employees. We have 2 or 3 or 4 in my photography studio. But when I do hire people or interview them, I say, well, we start at, let's say, $20 an hour, and you could make up to X amount of dollars. Does this then, if this becomes law, prohibit an employer for saying or posting just that, starting at, say, $30, we'll say $30 an hour, sounds better than 20, and you could make up to 50 or 60, and/or on some jobs, you can make a percentage of a particular, job site. So this would prohibit. You could have that. It would be an open-ended communication of that salary. That's all I wanted to clarify, and then I'm done.
Ms. James?
Mr. Chair, Representative McDonald, I think when you read line 2.2 in relation with how salary range is defined in the bill, it has a minimum and a maximum. So while that could be a large range, it couldn't be, like as it says, open-ended. There would have to be a number, would be my understanding. It could be a large range, but I would think it would have to be a minimum number and a maximum number.
And Representative Bonner, I want to wrap up, but before you do, it doesn't deal with wage ranges, but reminds me of a story my mother told me about my grandmother, who had a college degree, and in the late 40s, early 50s, she was raising 4 kids alone. And every time she got a decent paying job and she'd get into it, they'd come and, the employer after a few weeks would come and say, we have to take this job and give it to a man who has a family to raise, and she was out of a job. And this is something that we no longer allow, but that's, in the similar thing, women get treated a lot worse than men in many job situations. Representative Bonner, you can wrap up.
Thank you. I'm going to be very quick. I think this is a really excellent bill that provides really good transparency. I think it is the way that the world is moving, and it provides substantial benefits for employers and employees. And frankly, as legislators, I think that we have a vested interest in seeing that our citizens have all of the needs met by their families. It can make a real difference here. Again, if we can cut poverty rates by as much as 50% for women and children, that's a pretty big gain for states and for our citizens. So I would urge your support.
And with that, I'll renew my motion that House File 3587 be laid over, and the bill's laid over.